All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Audio Lecture Series at Utah Valley University, DAPR 301R. Today, my guest is Todd Urban. Todd lives out in New Jersey, has a couple of ventures that he's in charge of, and we're going to learn a little bit about those today. But I met Todd through a guest who was on a couple of weeks ago, Miles Fullwater, and I met Todd out at AES, and just happened to say the right thing to him that piqued his interest to get a conversation going. And that's all it takes sometimes in the audio world to get connections made. It's just somebody making an introduction and then just a couple of keywords that we both were very interested in. And here we are a couple of years later having a conversation in front of students. Todd is also somebody who is in education and has his own students. So let's jump right in and start asking the fun questions, and we'll just roll with this for the next 40 minutes or so. But Todd, what got you into audio, into the audio world at all?
Into the audio world? Well, I would say it was a necessity because I grew up in the 1990s. And so in the days of rock bands, when I'm in high school, in the days of rock bands, when you didn't really have access to, you had synthesizers, but you didn't really have sequencers in the way we do today. We didn't have a DAW. We didn't have any of that. The only way to get ahead was to hand out demo tapes, get gigs, and we're talking about cassette tapes. So I saved up enough money to get a Tascam Porta Studio, which was like this 4 fader, uh, and I think you could do pan on it too. But basically, it could take up to 4 inputs, and it was like, okay, we have our high school rock band. How do we record this? And it was no longer acceptable, by the way, to just record to the little microphone on a boombox because that's terrible. We all know that. So I think after mowing a million lawns and who knows what else, we finally got one and we recorded it, and the band sounded horrible because those things just were terrible. But um, but that was probably the first real experience I had actually recording stuff, was saving up the money to get that. And as primitive as it was, it actually opens up the door to get a lot of other groups to say, hey, can you record us to a cassette tape? Because otherwise you had to shell out a few $100 for just this cassette tape recorder that you would basically mix and bounce on. And that was in the, I guess, early to mid 90s, before digital recording really became popular. And then came around the DAT tape, the idea that you can record a stereo mix straight to digital, but that was kind of it at that point. So it was kind of me bouncing back and forth between which is the lesser of two evils. Do I record to cassette tape and have 4 tracks available to kind of balance on? And my options for like mixing were balance, left, right, and high and low EQ. That was it. Like nothing else. So do I do that, or do I run through something like a Mackie mixer? I think we had like a 1604 VLZ, which you've probably all seen. It's the standard medium format Mackie mixer. We had access to one of those, and then we got a DAT machine, which was over $1,000 just to record, to something that your iPhone does like a million times better. And yeah, and then but with the DAT machine, we had to record everything live. So it was one take. You got to nail it. Levels better be perfect. And as primitive as it was, that was how I got my start, and actually how I started getting clients, how I started selling some music. So
Nice. So
yeah,
I use those Porta Studios too. We're from the same generation where that was the popular thing,
yeah,
and what the students don't, and they'll probably never understand is, I mean, I should go find one and make them do a project recording
yeah.
and see how hard it is to actually get good, decent levels into those things. But it's not impossible, but it does teach you a lot of the intricacies about setting levels and getting things done. So fast forward from high school, you went to college and you studied music education and jazz performance, but then you continued on and got your master's degree. And how did this land you into well, you studied education, but like what made you get into education and what made you continue pursuing that path?
Yeah, so I went to school for, it was actually a music management jazz performance track at William Patterson, New Jersey, which is a great jazz school. I think they capped the number of students they accepted at like 14. It was a very small, intimate, but very competitive program. And I was absolutely the worst student that they accepted, to the point that they accepted me on probation. So, like, before I even had a chance, it's like, you're on probation. Um, when I got out of there, I was confident that I never wanted to teach. So I did that whole program, and then I was like, let me do the teacher certification thing. And then I was just kind of like, wait, I can tour, I can play gigs for a living, I could do all this fun stuff. I'm not ready to go into a classroom. So I actually didn't go into a classroom for the first, I don't know, 10 years or something, 5 years. Yeah, at least 5 years, probably more like 10 years. Um, I mostly was gigging and mostly arranging and mostly working as a side person on recordings, but not doing too much engineering. I was kind of dabbling with some live sound stuff, but nothing glamorous. Like, we're talking about bands playing out in parks and weddings and the occasional concert at a small venue, but nothing like amazing. Um, but I was still recording people. And that was the point that, like, Digi Designs 001 had come out, which was another wonderfully horrible thing to record on. But it was our first Pro Tools system in the way we think of it today. And once again, super expensive for something that wasn't so amazing, but that was the technology at the time. And because I had that, it gave me the opportunity to keep continuing to record people through that time.
Yeah, and so were you based in New York at the time? Were you still in New Jersey? Were you kind of back and forth? What was your setup like when you were doing that?
Yeah, I actually went to South Carolina, to Charleston, South Carolina. At that point, I was in New York, and then 9/11 happened. I was like, I'm getting the hell out of here. More so, not because I was afraid, but because all the gigs dried up like instantly overnight. So all this planning I had for, I'm going to work these many nights and tour this much, was just a dream. It was like a pipe dream all of a sudden instead of a realistic plan. So, and I had worked a quick short period over at Blue Note Records, and realized that it's just also really difficult unless you're going to be like one of these people in the studio 24/7, literally committing your life to only working in the studio. The idea of getting ahead in the production engineering role was also a pipe dream. You either have to like commit 100% or you're not doing it. And I kind of wanted to do everything. I wanted to perform, I wanted to arrange, I wanted to produce, I wanted to be all over the place. So for me, I still wasn't really making a living recording yet at that point, but I was learning a lot, especially it was such a dynamic time because the technology was changing so rapidly from like recording reel to reel, then to a cassette, then to a DAT, then to ADATs and DA88s and our first digital formats. And then Pro Tools came around and it was like, oh, a first real DAW kind of. And we would have separate DAWs for MIDI than we did for audio recording. That was, we don't even think about that anymore.
Right.
And every year it felt like the technology changed. It's like technology changes. We have some AI things coming out and all that, but really in the past 10, 20 years, it hasn't changed that much. But back through the 90s, it was like every year there was a massive thing. Actually, I forgot to mention mini discs. That was another one. These little,
I
if you guys
remember.
have never seen it, these little discs, they were like this big. I don't like maybe 2.5 inches uh, across. And I think was it Sony that pioneered it? I can't remember.
I think they were a little bit they weren't quite CD quality. They were
Oh,
a little bit degraded, but they, if I remember right, I just remember I didn't like how they sounded that much, but you could put a lot
no,
of music on them.
no, but and you, I remember I bought a stereo mic that was made just for that. Like, you had proprietary connections, so you had no flexibility. It wasn't like today. Like the computers you are all sitting in front of, any one of those computers has more power in it than like the first 15 years of my life working in this industry combined. Like if you take all of it, it doesn't even add up to like 1% of what's on your phone. It's just, but that's what we had to deal with. So,
Yeah, I've told the students here
yeah.
about working with bands and literally like putting enough EQ compression onto a snare
Hmm.
before your computer crashed. And then so you'd have to
Yeah.
commit the snare and then you'd have to go listen to it back and forth and then
Yeah.
undo it and go back and it just took forever. So you guys, you're spoiled. Your iPads can do more than what our computers could.
Yeah, but you know what? That's kind of cool that we had that experience because one thing, if we go back to that cassette tape, that Porta Studio, the one thing it really taught me, as terrible as it was, is it had 4 tracks and that's it. So if I want to record a certain number of overdubs, I had to sit there with a pencil and paper and write out how I was going to get through the song start to finish and capture everything because you had to think like, okay, I could record 3 tracks. Like my drums can be snare, kick, and overhead. That's all I have. And I think I probably did like snare, kick, and I probably did that, but I probably did also like overhead and kick and bass. And then you would bounce it all to one mono track. And now you have 3 tracks left, which means you could record two and bounce to one. And then you're left with two, which, you know, then you can say, I could take the other two and start bouncing them to the other two. But every time you bounce something, the the quality got worse. That was another thing. So
Oh
I
yeah, those
think,
days were
yeah.
fun.
Yeah. So the benefit of it is it's not that we have necessarily had a better experience. I think that's ignorant to say, but we had a unique experience that my students today can't relate to because we had to overcome challenges that you had to plan out. And I think because of that, one of the most important things is we had to figure out how to capture the best performance at the source every single time. There was no such thing as going back and fixing it or tuning a vocal or anything like that. It was like, this is it. You have one shot. Don't screw it up.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. That's funny. I can still picture those days very well. Uh, so you're in Charleston, South Carolina.
mhm.
What eventually led you back up into New York and got you were still performing, gigging? Where I lived in South Carolina as well. It seemed like all the
Yeah,
work down there was gospel related, church stuff. What were you doing while you were working down there?
I was doing everything. Um, I, I would occasionally do a church job just because the money was so good in church music. They have like an unlimited budget.
Yeah,
Um,
it's huge.
yeah, if any of you are into church music, just realize churches, especially being tax exempt and the amount of money flowing through them, you pretty much have an unlimited budget. It's insane. So as a performer, I could go out and make like 5 times the amount doing like a 1 hour church gig than I could working like 5 nights at a jazz club. It's just the way it is. And it's the easiest stuff. You just come on in and you read it once and you nail it perfectly. But um I would do some of those. Yeah, I was all over the place. I was playing 7 nights a week and a lot of the times 2 times a night or 3 times a night, just going from club to club to club. And so why did I leave? I guess life was just too good. I was like, oh, look at all this money I'm making and the weather's perfect and I live in a nice place. Why not go back to New York where it's overpriced and impossible to get work and really make myself feel miserable? So I did. I don't know. I guess the thing is, it's probably similar to Utah. I guess you probably have a really good local scene there, but you're limited by the confines of that area, right? It's you can't just get in a car and drive. I could drive to Atlanta when I was there. I could drive to certain areas, but I couldn't just in the New York, New Jersey area. You've got I was in Philadelphia yesterday. I just drove down, drove back in one day. I do the same thing to Boston in Boston all the time. I could get down to DC. So from this area, I could just nail all these different cities in one day of travel. When you're in Utah or you're in South Carolina, that's you're kind of constricted and confined to these specific regions. So I wanted to be in a little bit bigger of an area in terms of having some reach. So I moved back to New York City.
Yeah. No, we can hit Vegas in about 6 hours. And there's a couple small towns in between. And you can hit Boise up in like 5 hours. You can get to, I can't even remember how long it takes to drive to Denver, but that's if the mountains allow you to, because there's a lot of times that you get rerouted and cancel gigs between Salt Lake and Denver simply because of the mountains. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But I mean, if I could just add one more thing to that, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there are people in our industry that think like you better be in Nashville, LA, Miami, or New York, or maybe Boston, or you can't make a living or get anywhere. I don't agree with that. I think it depends on what your goals are and what your priorities are. If any of you look at what I've done, you're not going to find much because I'm not working with the Grammy winning artists and I'm not pushing. I work with a very specific type of client. And I personally love that because my friends who are making the known albums work nonstop all night long until 4 in the morning. And they get home and they struggle with their relationships. Not all of them, but most of them. I just don't want that at my age, right? I want a little bit of comfort mixed in with what I love to do, which is to work with great artists and record. And so, yes, if you want to make it on the big level, you do need to be in those big regions. But I moved out of New York because I didn't want that. Most people think we all want to win a Grammy. I mean, that would be amazing to be the engineer for the next Billie Eilish album or something. But I'm fine not being that ever because there's another side of life that comes with that if
you
that's your goal.
you talk about something that I've kind of hit a lot with a bunch of people throughout these interviews this year, and that's your work-life balance. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times our industry is not very friendly to a work-life balance. If you want to have a family, if you want to have relationships, if you because you're either married to the studio or you're married to your family, and seems like those two don't cross very often. What was it that drove you to have that good, healthy work-life balance and want to do what the other people seem like is crazy? And when we look at the flip side, we think that they're crazy.
I mean, I won't say that I had I won't say that there weren't times I was drinking way too much and out way too late and screwing up relationships. I'm on my third marriage. It's let's I'm not going to pretend that I did it all perfectly. Um, but through that course, I decided I had to prioritize some work life balance. Um, but I did know early on that I wanted a few things. And one of the things is I wanted to make enough money to feel secure because I have some people that I am very close with in my life that have been mind blowingly successful that you would think like we would switch places with any day. And they call me up looking for work, which means they're struggling financially. We think they're at the top of the charts and just doing so well. They're not. It's really, really hard, even when the perception we put out there on social media is that everybody's just rolling in the dough once you hit a certain level. Um, in that way, I'm ahead of them, but I'm also doing other things too. I'm running a business here. I'm doing it with an end goal of mind of being comfortable. So I knew I always wanted that. I didn't want to struggle. I work like crazy. I'm not going to pretend I don't work like crazy, but I don't struggle. I know I'm always going to eat. I have a house I live in. I live in a safe neighborhood. To me, that's important stuff,
Yeah.
more important than having my name at the top of the charts. So that was the big thing. I also don't have kids of my own. My wife has kids. Uh, but if not having my own kids was a big choice. If I had to raise kids, I couldn't be where I am now. I would not have been able to build up the client roster I have, and I would not have the production credits of working on the shows I've worked on and other things. It's just so that was a choice I had to make too.
Yeah. So let's talk about the things that you actually do now. You're
Mhm.
teaching at a university. Which university are you teaching at?
It's Passaic County Community College in New Jersey. So it's a 2-year school. And I helped design the curriculum there. And I do work there. I teach about 1 to 2 semesters or 1 to 2 classes per semester. It's a good school. We cram. It's basically 4 audio engineering classes in the degree that we cram in the equivalent of what you get in a 4-year degree. So it's my students hate me for the first few semesters until they graduate and they realize because they usually go to a 4-year school to finish out the degree. And then they get there and they realize they already know 90% of what the 4-year school is teaching them. But um, that's that program. I also work with a bunch of schools on curriculum development and assessing kind of where the direction of the uh, industry is going so they can make sure that they're keeping current
Yeah.
with the changes.
You own your studio, Urban Sound Studio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What kind of work are you guys popping out there? I mean, I know, but what
Yeah.
talk about it a little.
Yeah. It's mostly just me for the most part. I do have some interns I work with. And it varies. I was doing a bunch of band work. Um, but the space is not conducive to having like a real like I don't have the full isolation that you might want if you want a fully isolated recording. So I was doing a lot of jazz work in some classical or through composed work where bleed is actually a good thing or where the performers want to be able to interact acoustically with each other. Where if you had ISO booths, that would be actually a negative. So I think one of the things I'm proud to be good at is learning how to position mics to get the best sound out of that artist and capture what we want emotionally from that artist, but also not interfere with them because a lot of the great performers out there don't know how to perform once a mic's put in front of them. So, take a violinist, put a KM 184 right in front of their violin, they're probably going to play horribly because this thing that is just in their line of sight. So we have to think, how do we capture these instruments? So that's the one thing I think I like to think I'm really good at. The flip side of that, which I also do, is I work with a lot of artists on taking their idea from either the initial phase to a certain point or they're at a certain point and I take it to completion. So what I mean by that is these are songwriters that come in and they either have a song or they think they have a song, and I usually tell them they don't yet. And we do the whole pre-production phase of like, what's the objective? What's our budget? What are we looking to accomplish? Are we looking to release this on Spotify, or are you actually going to make an album? Is this going to be a single? And we do everything from it could just be them, or it could be hiring session musicians. It could be working with virtual instruments. I'm a multi instrumentalist, so a lot of the times I also perform on a lot of their stuff. And then the third thing I do is I work with a few different artists uh, on pitching their music for shows. So it's kind of like we're doing demos, but these are not demos in the way most people are thinking demos. These are pretty polished, ready to go, fully blown recordings that are being pitched to investors for either Broadway or commercial sync type things for TV or movies. So I just gave you a lot of answers.
No, yeah,
I do a lot. I'm all over the place.
it's all right.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it helps out a lot. I think it shows diversity. It shows that you're willing to put a lot of different hats on to do exactly what you said. Be comfortable. Know that you're going to have food on your table. That you're going to live in a comfortable house in a comfortable neighborhood. Um, The other thing that you do, and this is the how we actually connected, is you're the United States representative for SoftTube.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that came up, and what you do with them?
Yeah, so I've been with SoftTube for about 8 years, I think. I started off SoftTube, if you don't know, SoftTube's a Swedish company, and we started off as a company making our own plugins and DSP and also writing DSP and code and plugins for other platforms and other companies. And one of those companies was Universal Audio. So I was doing some work. I have a YouTube channel, and I was one of the early people in terms of YouTube making content. So I don't really do the influencer thing in the typical way. I make educational videos, and they do pretty well. But I was making some educational videos, and one of them happened to be around some SoftTube products. So as I think I made one of them, and then somehow it caught on that I had done that, and I was asked, "Oh, would you mind going to AES in New York City and just t manning a booth, basically just working at the booth to answer questions?" Actually, soft, yeah, I'm trying to remember the timeline. The distributor for SoftTube at the time contacted me and asked me to make a video first, and then I was asked to do a booth, and from there it turned into like, oh, what else can we do? And it was gradual. It was kind of like, oh, I see these opportunities. We work together on a consulting basis, and eventually, as the company grew and as we had more hardware and more software titles, it was kind of like, okay, we need somebody to also help work with partnerships, product development. We need somebody in the US or North America just helping to work with dealers and answer questions and different partners there. And that's where I am today.
Yeah, and that's how we met, because we were talking. Miles introduced me, told me about your soft tube, and of course I was like, "Oh, you guys are the ones that do the tube tech stuff." And I said, "We've got a tube tech here at the university. When are you guys going to release the SMC2B?" And you were like, "Let's go talk." That was
Yeah.
a fun moment for me.
Yeah, yeah. It was cool. And you're super lucky to have that hardware because most schools do not. It's a incredibly expensive piece of hardware. So,
Yeah,
by
I
the,
went to
yeah.
school here.
Mm,
Just the story behind that. And when I was a senior, our professor, he was like, "Okay, this is our budget for the year. What should we get?" And I was like, "I want a mastering compressor." And
hmm.
we couldn't get the one that was detinted because that one costs more. And we spent the entire year budget back then on that compressor.
Yeah.
So that's how we have it.
But so worth it
Yeah.
to have, one like a legacy like piece of hardware like that.
Yeah. Super cool. And I
I'm
love it. And the plugin is great.
I'm
So
curious how many, maybe this is a question for the students if I could ask them, but how many of you are actually thinking of an industry job rather than doing your own thing?
we didn't see any hands. Got
One
one,
of you, two of you?
two, maybe.
Yeah. Um, I ask that because I think some of the times people think that's like a negative maybe, or like you go to it when things don't work. Um, I didn't go to it because things didn't work. I went to it because things worked. So it was, and I find it interesting when people ask me about that, like, or kind of have that perception. You have to love it. It's a different part of the industry, but I think my job's pretty awesome. I literally work with a company that pushes the direction of the whole industry. So it's like we're developing where the industry is going. Maybe not in terms of like musical genre specific directions for who's going to be the next pop star, but definitely in terms of how people are mixing and engineering and working and producing. And I think that's super cool to not just be on the production side, but also influence how everyone else does everything. So,
I've noticed a shift in this type of students that we get, even just in the school, because we used to get a lot of people that just wanted to go work solely as a musician or to
mhm.
record musicians. We're getting a lot of people who have a lot of interest in video game sound. We're
Mm.
getting a lot of people who are working in film production and that kind of sound. And we do have students who are very keen on developing their own plugins as well. And that is something that is I've never seen as
Mhm.
in 14 years of education. This is pretty new. People having that drive to be able to do that.
I'm not smart enough to make my own plugins. The the company does it for me. I wish I was, but that's not my. No, we have engineers that do that. Um, I know nothing about video game music and sounds, but I have a lot of friends that work for Microsoft and Sony and have done and some of the independent gaming companies, and they make a really good living and they love it.
Yeah.
I
I
just never did it.
I never did it either. I've only made sound effects for a video game and I didn't even plug them into the I was just going out and recording sound effects and turning them over to somebody. I didn't know how
Mm-hmm.
they got into the game. These guys, they're learning all that stuff now. So like I said, it's big difference from when I went through school, and that's not necessarily that super long ago. But
Mm-hmm.
from what we've gone through in our lives and what people who are the generation above us have gone through in their lives, I was just over at Mog Audio yesterday. They have their native instruments and all their plugins, and they filled up their hard drive so fast installing all their virtual instruments and stuff, and they're like, our computer doesn't run. And I'm like, I can fix that, and go spend a couple hours. And they're like, how did you do that? Just that lack of step down knowledge um from coming from somebody who's real to real to somebody who's grew up with computers. We have an advantage, but then I look at that in the same way as what our students are. They have some advantages in this technology because like coding isn't so hard or foreign to them. Coding was something I learned in college that was made my brain hurt, and they've taken courses through elementary school and junior high, high school where they're doing these kind of things, and I just see such a bright uh, future for them as far as their capabilities because they have so much resource at their fingertips. And I think that's one of the things that you guys do, and what you're talking about shifting the industry is because you're creating resources that people can use that would be normally so impossible to get. The TubeTech SMC 2B, $7,000 for a compressor. Not a lot of people are going to go out and buy that compressor, but you release a plugin that people can afford because it's a couple $100. All of a sudden, you've changed the industry dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah. The accessibility is great. I think about tape. I mean, I never worked. I have worked on a tape machine, a reel to reel tape machine, but I never worked on it where it was my primary medium. Um, and I definitely never worked on it enough to feel like I was one of these people that knew the exact benefits of working on tape. There are people who spent their life doing this. However, having a great tape plugin that captures the crosstalk and the proper saturation and things like that uh, allows us to experience some aspects of tape. And, so yeah, plugins are great in that sense. Also, we make controllers, like
Yeah,
this thing, wherever it is behind me.
right behind you.
Yeah, the one I'm blocking,
Yep.
so don't look at it. Um,
Secret. It's still
yeah,
non-disclosure. Just
that's out there. Uh, but having that available, having a product like console one channel and console one fader, and having people get the ability to touch things and move things like we used to do, because there is a generation from like the mid 1990s to like I don't know, just a few years ago that nobody touched anything besides their mouse to mix. And because of that, they mix in a different way than the people who actually closed their eyes, listened, grabbed a knob, and tweaked it. I'm not going to say one's better or worse, but the results are very different, and the approach is very different. So I think making these type of tools changes the way we mix and think and produce.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you on that. You can look at something all day and do the visual EQ, or you can use your ears. And what you guys have with that console one is an opportunity to kind of blend the two, where you can kind of look at it if you need to, but you can also close your eyes and go into a different space for a minute and come back and look at what you've done, which creates different results than if you're looking at it because your brain goes, oh, that EQ curve might not look the way that I think it should. And you'd be surprised. I mean, you know this, but I'm surprised how much visual mixing went on for so long.
Yeah, yeah. I have, for the first time ever, a fully blind student this year. Actually, I had him last semester too. And what's interesting is we were studying reverbs and delays and modulation types this past week. And I had to try and figure out what to do in terms of having him experience this because he can't see the plugin. And so I got him a Strymon Blue Sky guitar pedal, and I allowed him to just run out of a console through it and play with the presets, play with the pre-delay, the wet dry mix, uh, decay time, all that stuff that we're all aware of. And what's interesting is, so he can't see, he can't cheat here. He can't see what setting he's on, but he was instantly able to tell me what each of the knobs were doing and what the preset was by the demo I had previously given over a Zoom class, knowing what a nonlinear reverb sounds like and things like that. Meanwhile, in the other room, because Adam set up in a different room to experience this, in the other room where students were working like you all are in front of computers and they're pulling up various plugins, they can't tell. I shouldn't say they can't. Most of them were struggling to hear any sort of difference from one reverb type to the next because they're so focused on the GUI, the visual aspect, and what do the controls say and what do they look like. And I don't think he might have an advantage with hearing some things. He's used to only using his ears. But to me, what it said is, yeah, once we're distracted by the visual on the screen, everything changes, right? He's the only one at that time hearing it the way the listener will hear, which is not looking at a GUI, but just hearing the reverb for what it is.
Yeah.
So that was a really cool learning experience for me, just to figure out first how do I teach him this, and then realize how quickly he gets it when he doesn't even have to see anything, just hear it. So
Yeah. That's thanks for sharing that because that's really neat. I had a partially deaf student a couple years ago, and we were curious about what frequency range she could hear. So we swept sound through speakers, and I had her raise her hand when she could hear it, and then put her hand down when she stopped hearing it.
mm.
And we made some marks in class, and then we asked her if she would be comfortable asking her audiologist to share what her actual hearing spectrum was, and to see just in a classroom with a couple speakers how close we were able to get to what her audiologist actually stated. And she started lowering her hand at one point because she, and on her graph that the audiologist gave us, she has a dip before she can get to the end of the range. And so partial hearing and watching that and demonstrating that in the class was really cool. I'm sure it's a similar experience to your students watching somebody play with a pedal and be like, "Oh yeah, this," and then like, "Man, how did they do that?" And it's because again, you're busy looking at what all the things say, and you're not focusing on what you're hearing. It's a big difference. What do you see the industry doing in the next couple of years, and where do you see yourself in the next like 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Well, everyone always asks me that. In terms of where I see the industry, I think it's possible that we might see a shift in the type of music people are listening to. Uh, we've hit a point with popular music and pop music where the expectation of sonic deliveries and frequency extension, layers, transient response, everything is so heightened. Um, it, it almost can't get better, right? We've got like full frequency extension, all the way low, all the way high, layers of, like, you hear a snare drum, it's like 10 snares going at once and claps and reverbs and effects and gates and on just a basic beat. Um, we've seen some places that where people have pulled back from that, like the oh my god, I can't the Silk Sonic stuff, right? They kind of go for a more vibey, old school style sound while retaining the integrity of modern production. I can see more of that happening. I think there's going to be like a little bit of a pullback from the younger generation because I think they want to, some of them I'm seeing it, my students want to play a guitar, want to play drums, want to learn what it's like to play in a band before they produce in front of a computer. So yeah, I do think the computer stuff will keep pushing forward. The AI stuff will keep happening. But I do think people are going to want to go back to like the fundamental idea of like, what's it like to pick up an instrument and play it? Because if we lose that, you are going to lose some sort of connection to what music was all about from the beginning. So I don't know where that'll end up. I think in terms of where I'll be, I think because of my history with that and my type of clients, I think I'll just be fine. I'll just keep moving in the direction that the industry goes and be open to where my clients go with it. I don't think I'm going to be that different from where I am today, except hopefully have a little more money and a little less work to do and closer to retirement. Um,
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. I don't know, we're having problems in the classroom with the microphone. And does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Todd that we can get him to answer right now?
So I'd like to ask, what was like one of the hardest adjustments you've had to change to either when moving, switching different clients? What is something that has been really hard for you to adjust to in the industry?
ah, yes. And anytime you up and move, you're probably going to need to almost reset your client base. So um, be prepared to have a real hard time financially for a little bit of a while to adjust. That's just the reality. Um, I think one thing that's easier today is I have a lot of clients are that I've never met in real life that are just online. I meet with them via something like Zoom. We'll do some pre-production work. I'll even let them hear some of my adjustments as I'm doing them live. I'll just share a ProTools session, and then I'll finish the mix on my own through my whole setup. Um, so it's a little easier to keep some clients now and move around, but still, if I was to up and just move today without thinking about where I was going, I would probably lose like a good 75% of my revenue minimum. So that's huge. That's the difference between me paying the bills and not. So you have to really plan for that. I will say though, that I'm so insanely happy that I took the time when I was young to take those risks because the older you get, the more difficult it feels to be able to do that for so many reasons. I mean, one is just health, right? Like as we get older, there's more health costs. It's more difficult to physically change your life. But absolutely, if you're thinking about moving and you think you have a plan in action, you've spoken to people, try to do it while you're young because you probably, if you postpone it, won't ever end up doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And there's that delay. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I love that
Danny, you got
delay.
a question?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned how I guess back in the 90s there was some pieces of gear that you purchased and at the time were probably really awesome, but by today's standards maybe aren't so great. And then we've talked about how cool our computers and iPads and phones can be, but from your experience, are there any like pieces of gear that have come out in recent years that you would say are worth getting for a student, or would you just recommend that a student kind of rely on their computer for all their work?
Yeah, good point. Well, I have this talk almost every week with my students because every week some student walks up to me and asks me about something they want to purchase, and I have to have this heart to heart of like, it's the exact same question every time. Why are you purchasing anything? What's the benefit of it? What are you trying to do? And with my students, it's probably especially a little more essential to ask this because most of them are inner city students that are really trying to make financial decisions that are strong, and we're trying to help direct them beyond just an education in technology. But I think it applies to any young person. How do we get started with collecting stuff? I have bought so much stuff that I've sold and wasted money on, or wish I kept, or I wish I could just like go back through life and redo it all. And because I would have kept some stuff, I would have never bought other stuff. So I think one thing is, and this is coming from somebody who works for a plugin company, keep that in mind. Don't just go buy plugins. um, Try them first. I'm not saying don't buy any plugins, but be strategic in what you're going to buy. Think about, before you just jump on something and buy it, what are you missing? Or what can a product do for you to take things further? And by the way, I think it's absolutely fine to say, I bought this synth product because I think it looks and sounds cool and I'm bored. Like if that's I'm being serious. If that's your answer, that you've like hit a plateau where you're just like feeling kind of down about production, because we all get there, and you just need a little spike to just like get your interest going, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're aware that buying that synth product probably won't make anything better. It'll just kind of help inspire you a bit. So, that's one area of caution, is that I do think things like, as I said, I never push my own products, but I think console one, the idea of having something tactile to touch, I think is a big deal. And let me just name another product just so I'm not being biased. I mean, it could be something like a Behringer X Touch or a PreSonus fader port, something with faders on it. And it could just be a single one, just for you to try something. Or it could be, if you have an iPad, get an iPad app that allows you to play with transport, just so you get into a different mode than mixing with a mouse. I think that's essential. I would highly recommend every single one of you, if you're doing music when you get out of school, to make sure that you have some sort of competency on a keyboard to do more than just playing chords and notes and inputting them. It's going to be essential to building your rapport with clients. So that means, get a MIDI. I have right under here is a Native Instruments Complete Control, and there's about 20 synthesizers in this room on that wall. So if I start turning it around, so it's not that I need the sounds that's underneath, but they're accessible and they're immediate. So I would consider stuff like that. That's beyond just a plugin. That's something that allows me to work quickly. I don't know. One last thing I would say is I'm also not. Yeah, just be careful with what you buy in terms of things like microphones. My students go, "What mic should I buy? Should I buy this mic by whatever company?" And I go, "Well, do you have an SM57?" And they go, "Not yet." And I go, well, "Why not? It's like the number one mic in the world, and it's $100. Why would you buy something for 200 that's probably kind of crappy and you'll never use after the fifth time?" I've got 5 SM57s in the closet next to me, so buy one of those first. So that's my other suggestion. Think about what's also essential. Don't feel like you have to go out and buy a $4,000 U87 right away, but also don't buy stuff that's junk. Think about what's strategic. What don't you have? Your professor's SM7B there in front of them. Like if you want to do that, cool, go for it. It's $400. Is it going to make you $400 better? Maybe, maybe not. You'll probably keep it forever, right? So. Hope that helps. You're muted there.
Yeah, I just realized that I said
Yeah.
a good answer, and then I looked and saw that my meter's not, I shut it off so I didn't interrupt the question. But we buy microphones impulsively. We buy things impulsively because we think it's cool. Last semester we had Joe Barisi on, and we talked about this little microphone right here, the copper phone. You know,
Mm.
I love how it looks. I don't use it very often. It sits on my desk, but every once in a while, if I need to get inspired, I just throw that on because it changes everything up. And I like how you talked about that, because sometimes it is our workflow that is constricting us, and sometimes simply doing something different or going somewhere different allows us to open up our mind. We got a portable studio in our pockets a lot of the time. I use the voice recorder often, and sometimes I'll just take my guitar and go sit somewhere that I've never sat before, and an idea pops into my head that, because I have that flexibility, it's so cool to have.
Yeah. Do you guys have a Neumann head there? So this is like, those of you that are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, shame on you. But this is going to be probably one of my next videos. But my this showed up, and my client goes, I'm trying to move my computer back so we can see what the heck this is. My client goes, "What's in the box? A head?" And I go, "Yes, you want to see it?" And it's literally, that's my dog. He gets very excited. It's the Neumann binaural head. I'm trying to get this in the shot.
We can kind of see it.
Yeah, there we go. But I'm going to do a whole series on this. And let's see. It's a pretty cool thing. I thought it was the dumbest thing before I understood what it was. But I'll give you guys the sneak peek. It's a $10,000 microphone is what it is. So yes, every one of you should buy one of these.
You all have that money. I know Whitney does. Whitney's got it. Just he rolls in the bank.
There you go. But basically what it does is it's a microphone in each ear, and each ear very freakishly feels exactly like a human ear. And the facial structure actually is the exact density of like a human skull and the cartilage of a nose, and really weird stuff. So even though it looks like a robot, it feels very much like a human head. But the idea of it is it mimics HRTF, head related transfer function. So I'll keep it not too nerdy. Basically, when we hear binaurally, we have a delay from one ear to the next, right? If I speak into this ear, you can still hear the voice in this ear, but delayed. And not only delayed, filtered too, right? Because the whole facial structure filters out certain frequencies. But our brains psychologically reassemble these sounds to sound like one sound. This captures that perfectly. So you put the sucker up in the middle of a concert hall, it sounds like you're sitting in the concert hall. Something that you can't do with two microphones the way you can with this. So my little teaser is going to be, if you want to stay tuned on my channel, I'll probably do it in the next few weeks, is I'm going to interview the head, like actually talk to the head.
Talk to the head. Not talk to the hand anymore. It's talk to the head.
Talk to the head. And I'm getting my friend of mine is he's German. He's the engineer for the Berlin Philharmonic, and he's going to respond in a German accent, and I'm going to overdub that as if it's talking back to me, because we get bored.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I think that's awesome. I think that
Yeah.
it really shows, how to keep also what you're doing creative and fresh too, because
Yeah.
the one thing that can happen, and this, we can sit and do the same thing over and over and over again, and then you just kind of like, okay, whatever, it's the same thing. But I like how you brought that out. It allows you to do something similar but different that opens up a lot of creativity, and I think that that's what you're trying to display there. Does anybody else have any questions? We've got to bounce. I got another class I got to get to with a drum recording. Todd Urban from Urban Sound Studio, Soft Tube, and Passaic Community College, all in one in-house. Thank you so much for your time, for your conversation, for your insights.
Yep.
If they want to reach out to you and have any questions, are you open to receiving emails?
Reach out to me. Yeah, just send me a message on my website.
Okay.
Or on YouTube or something.
urbansoundstudios.com. So
Yep.
awesome. Well,
Go
thank
find
you.
me.
And I'll be in touch with you shortly.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming
Okay.
out.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye.